Thank you, everyone, for coming in. It's a pleasure to welcome you in tonight. Thank you. Sorry, I should also, before getting too far into the introduction, hold up a mobile phone and ask you if you could turn yours off. It would be a pleasure. Thank you. I was trying to think how to begin an introduction. When I was a teenager, many years ago on the West Coast in the States, I had the opportunity one year while studying at the Art Institute in San Francisco to meet some famous West Coast architects. One of them was an architect named Nathaniel Owings, and I was at an age not knowing who Nathaniel Owings was, and I asked him, as students do, what have you designed? And he said, I designed an office called SOM. And in fact, that was what he once told me then his brief was from Lewis Skidmore, to design an office that, in the words of Lewis Skidmore, would outlast not just the buildings of his competitors, but his competitors. And to create, in fact, a structure for learning and thinking that offices at that time couldn't quite comprehend as a way of working. I think tonight's lecturer is a designer not just of buildings that you all will know around the world for the place they play in skylines and cities everywhere today, but really of an office that, like that office in the middle years of the 20th century that I referred to, really has tried to rethink how it is architects learn and work together, not just amongst one another, but in relation to you could say, a growing world of other consultants and contributors and participants in the design process. Eugene Kohn wrote the following in 1996 in an issue very close to the 20th anniversary of the office for A+U. He said, since the founding of KPF 20 years ago, we have seen profound changes in the practice of architecture due to three sweeping forces: the globalization of the economy, the rapid advance of technology, and the increasing advocacy of local culture. And I think the point to make tonight would be all three of those realities, and I think the consequences of those realities have, of course, only accelerated in the last 14 or 15 years. And I think it's fair to say that perhaps no other architect practicing today is in the position of Gene to understand fully both the consequences and the potentials of globalization in relation to architectural practice. Eugene Kohn co-founded KPF on July 4th, 1976, during a time of incredible economic, you could say, uncertainty in the city of New York that was particularly stressed by finance and the economy at the time, during a recession and during what you could say is the first great wave of the West's sense of an energy crisis. And I think all of those are conditions today, many years later, that you could say have returned to our world and to the practice and to the field, not necessarily with a vengeance, but with a kind of reality that gives the sort of experience that Gene and his collaborators have incredible importance for architects to think about how to move forward. KPF today is, of course, an office that works with hundreds of employees in many, many countries, building buildings throughout the world, and in that way is interesting in that as an office they share the kind of experience we have as a school like this today, an international school. Within a few years of KPF's founding in the 1970s, they realized a building that was a very, very important part of the American and world discussion of architecture in the 1980s at 333 Wacker Drive in Chicago, a kind of icon of its era, and a building that arrived amidst a debate between history and modernism that was getting tired at the time and in which it offered a way forward. I think by arguing architectural form in relation to context and material, it pushed past, I think, many of the cliches that even some of the more famous buildings of the time tried to distill down to simple comments or discussions. And I'm thinking particularly of a year later, a building like AT&T's Chippendale-topped headquarters in New York. KPF has, of course, since that time designed many, many buildings that you all will know around the world. Important, indeed, iconic structures in cities like Shanghai, in New York, in Tokyo, in Kowloon, in many, many other cities in Europe and North America. Their American Institute at Oxford opened a few years ago here in the UK. They've worked with great businesses of all kinds, world headquarters for companies like IBM and many others, and they're indeed the recipients of, I think, more than 300 design awards in their distinguished history as an office. In 2010, Eugene Kohn is the recipient of the Soane Foundation Honors, the Alumni Award of Merit at the University of Pennsylvania. He's been recognized with the Wharton Real Estate Center's Lifetime Achievement Award, and he's an executive fellow of the Graduate School of Design at Harvard and the first ever architect to receive that award, and he teaches and still finds time to teach at the Harvard Business School. And I thought just finally and importantly, with Gene's support, KPF is, of course, a sponsor and supporter of our public program series that this talk is a part of, and I thought for this reason it's important to say not just welcome, but to also say thank you, and for coming back and seeing us here at the A. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eugene Kohn.
Very nice, Brett. Thank you. Thank you, Brett. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. By the way, when we started KPF, we actually started in the same place that SOM did in New York.
Amazing.
A few years later, obviously, but on 57, just off Fifth Avenue. I started this show with a little unusual kind of slide, and that is one that talks about, by the way, can everybody hear? That talks about leadership, because today's talk is not going to be just about design and our philosophy and why we're better than someone else. That's not my goal. It's really to talk about the role of the architect, the responsibility of the architect, and also how architecture really gets accomplished. And it is by team, and it is by leadership of teams that one needs to really succeed. Just a little bit about my background. I have both my undergrad and graduate degrees from the University of Pennsylvania. And in between the two, I served in the Navy for 3 years as a lieutenant commander, so leadership became important during that period. But also as an architect, as a young architect, I was exposed to some great ones. Paul Rudolph was my first inspiration. He was a young architect. His pants were always too short, his sleeves too short, haircut and a crew cut, but one of the most enthusiastic architects and professors you could ever have. I mean, he made architecture such a joy, you didn't want to go back home, you just wanted to travel with Paul and see buildings, which he did, take us on. Lou Kahn was my greatest inspiration, and studied with Lou. But during the period at Penn, Gropius, Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, Philip Johnson, I.M. Pei, and many others came to visit or teach at the university, along with Louis Mumford, who was one of the great writers and social consciences of our time, great planners and landscape architects. So the total experience was really spectacular. And it took many years to realize how good it was. You know, you sometimes while you're in school don't fully appreciate what you're learning and the experience you have. But years later, those influences and those moments at school all have come back to be really important to me. I just wanted you can read this without my quote, but basically there are two kinds of leadership. There's the conventional where you lead down and you order people down. It's very, very true in the military normally. Or this one, which is really a leadership that's done by being next to you, by being part of you. It's called lateral leadership. And basically, it's one that allows people to grow and to mature as you lead them and to become successful. So if you want to read that, you can. The one at the bottom is very important. No man will make a great leader who wants to do it all himself or to get all the credit for doing it. Andrew Carnegie. And that really is really about what our firm is. It's about a team. It's not about a superstar. It's not about individuals, but about a whole team working together. Great talent, great individuals. And so what I want to talk about tonight is not only I think what the importance of architecture is, but also how we're organized and how our global experience, which Brett talked about briefly, but one that has been really important in informing our architecture and the way we operate. And finally, I thought we'd have a little fun and talk about how economics affect architecture. And we're going through a really tough time now, as many of you might realize, and have in the past other tough times. So I might show you how its impact is on architecture. And also, when times are good and people are exuberant, particularly this last go-around, how form and sculptural form, began to dictate and become iconic images on the skyline, and whether that's good or bad for the cities. So we'll start with first, we were founded, as Brett said, in 1976 on July 4th. For those of you who might remember that day, July 4th is an important holiday in the U.S. I don't usually bring it up in front of my British friends, but it's, of course, the day that 200 years prior was important to our freedom. I always show this slide and say, would you hire this group? I mean, to do anything. But this is the day we started, July 4th, 1976. And the young lady is Pat Conway. Although she was not a partner, she was a very important a planner and writer and interior designer. You see, I haven't changed. I have gray hair then, still now. Shelley Fox, a very close friend of mine who unfortunately passed away from brain cancer. And Bill Patterson, who is a handsome guy, but he looks a little hunched here. He's usually not that way. But we look like a group that probably needed work desperately. And our first building, you know, everybody wonders how you get started and when you form a firm and get going. So this is the good fortune. The day we started the firm, or the day before, I met with a close friend who was very wealthy. He was not an architect. And he said, Gene, I have some advice for you. He said, you'll succeed by the work you turn down. I said, the work we have no work. I've invested, I have no money. I've got 3 kids in school. And he's talking about turning down work. So I thought, well, you must be joking. Well, believe it or not, no sooner than he said that, and we started the firm, I get offered a project in Iran. I had worked in Iran previously, and one of the clients called me and said, Gene, I want you to do this new headquarters for the Bank Melli in Tehran. That was very exciting. I offered a major fee, and for a firm with no money, no work, it sounded pretty exciting. So I talked it over with Shelley and Bill, and we did the right thing. We looked at the pluses and minuses, and we had wanted to start the firm as a U.S. firm. We felt that at that time, most of the big firms, SOM, HOK, and others were working, and CRS were working in places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and elsewhere, and not concentrating on home. Although we were going through a terrible recession, Brett referred to it, but New York had 60% unemployment in 1976 when we started the firm of architects. So there were a lot of architects available, but unfortunately no work for them. So we wanted to start in the U.S., but it's hard to turn down a project with a very big fee when you have no money and a chance to do a project. So we debated it, and I still remember on a Sunday in the kitchen of Shelley Fox's house, leaning against the refrigerator for support, I had called the client in Iran and turned it down. And I did because we didn't want to get stuck commuting back and forth to Iran when we're trying to build a practice in the States. And I knew, having worked there, that it would not be an easy place to actually negotiate the contract, get it signed, and get paid. So here we'd be laying out money we didn't have to travel and do the work. So we turned it down. So the next day is Sunday, and in the Sunday Times, New York Times, there's a little article in the real estate section that says there's an armory that the American Broadcasting Company, then the 3rd largest national network, had just bought and was going to use for a soap opera studio. I'm sure you all watch soap operas, 1 hour long. And so turned out I knew a vice president there, and Shelley did. We called and said, look, we'd love to do this building for you. It's 43,000 square feet. You're going to convert it from a tennis court and a military armory into a soap opera studio. Well, fortunately, we were the only ones that called. And we were the only ones to get interviewed. Now, if we had lost the interview, it would have been pretty embarrassing. But fortunately, we won since we're the only ones. And we got to do this job. And it became the first of 17 projects for the American Broadcasting Company. And that got us started. And the American Broadcasting Company paid its invoices within 10 days, and we got a very good fee. Always got good fees from them. So this project launched our firm, and it led, I can actually track every good thing that happened as a result of not taking the job in Iran and accepting this job here. So let's just follow. This was the second building we did for them, which was just a studio building where they did their news and broadcasting, and these were all the writers up here who did the news coverage, and the main lobby where the public could come in to see the studios. But this is the project that Brett referred to briefly, 333 Wacker Drive. It came as a direct result that we took the first ABC job. A fellow who was the head of the company they called Urban Development, Tom Klutznick, called me. I knew him from some previous work. And he said, Gene, I understand you're working for the American Broadcasting Company and you're kind of the experts. We weren't the experts, by the way, but I didn't do anything to disavow that notion. And he said, look, I'd like you to study a building on the bend of the Chicago River for ABC Chicago. So now just understand this. In the U.S., Chicago is the main city for great architecture. And it's very difficult for non-Chicago architects to work here. Firms like SOM in Chicago control the city, basically. So for a new firm, nobody knew us, including our families didn't know who we were. we get selected to design this building of 1 million square feet on the bend of the river. I think, and one that reflects beautifully the color of the sky, the water, and to this day is the most loved building by Chicagoans in Chicago, particularly when you take the river cruise. You get to see this building and all its glory. Key is this building became a catalyst for the entire development along the river. When this was built, it was by itself. And so it's been a very valuable thing. But this building gave us the national coverage that the firm has a hard time getting. As a result of that, we have begun to get works like the Procter & Gamble World Headquarters, which then led to the Goldman Sachs headquarters here, to IBM in Montreal, one after the other, all because this project was well known. And as a result of that, we became, we'll talk about global expansion in a moment. What I wanted to talk about, though, interrupt the history of KPF at this point, is the role of the architect and the responsibility of an architect. For many of you in school, because I remember my days, the important drawing, the beautiful picture, the model you make becomes all important. But the reality is that what architects really contribute to society is critical. In fact, I don't know of any other profession. You could even debate medicine versus architecture. What it does for the health, mental and physical health, positive or negative, of all society. When we build buildings, it isn't just art. The architecture that you create affects the people. This classroom, for example, the ones I teach at Harvard Business School, a course on design, so it's not business. And it's tiered classroom. Every student can see equally as well, can hear me. Daylight helps their eyes. The screens are all across the entire wall. That classroom, people learn in dramatically. I went when I started teaching there and looked back at the classrooms from 1925 on. And they were much like this, but even more dense, with the writing surface and people leaning around to see the blackboard, listen to the teacher. And by the way, there's seats closer for yours in the back. You might want to come up closer. But in the environment we create, whether it's for teaching, for working, for living, for hospitals, whatever it might be, is critical to the people. I mean, if you think about people who commit crimes, not of passion, of anger, sometimes if you just trace where they live, you go to New York and you go to some of the poor neighborhoods, and you see the apartments that people live in, 10, 11 people crowded into a few rooms, low ceilings, windows next to the L, noise, heat. By the time they get through the night, if they sleep at all, and get on the subway, which is crowded, get to work, they're already in a bad frame of mind. So we don't really help people if the environment they live in is one that's is negative. So as an architect, you really have to understand when you create space and place. It's not just what looks good aesthetically, that's important. But really is the environment that you're creating one that is conducive to the purpose of the building and the space and to the health of the individual. So we do affect the mental and physical health of people. And you can look at yourself as you walk into a space, see how you feel. Just do you stand tall and you smile, you feel good, or do you hunch over? Are you less secure? Space has a way of doing that. I worked for Stanley Marcus years ago. It was a great retailer, Neiman Marcus. And Stanley once said to me that you can tell a great place, great architecture, by how you feel when you're in the space. If it makes you feel good, makes you feel confident, stand tall, it's a space that's doing the right thing. And he was absolutely right. So wherever I go, I try to understand how I feel in the space, how the color affects me, the light or lack of light, ceiling heights, proportions, textures. All this thing is important. So give it a lot of thought because we play a very important role in the built environment as well as the sustainable environment. Okay, global expansion, because I really wanted to dwell on when you create a firm, you don't always think about what the ultimate growth could be. I was very excited when KPF got work in other states. Here we started in New York, we go to Chicago, all of a sudden we are in Arizona, and eventually California. And for a New York firm, that was pretty exciting, a small firm. But we stayed with one office, and we kept to do everything in that office. And my partners, Bill Pedersen, Shelley Fox, and I worked very closely together on projects. We always reviewed things so that we worked as a team. And Bill is extremely talented, but he was always part of the team. Shelley and I all worked together so that our projects were the work of the three of us, and eventually others as they joined the firm. The idea to go global, though, was a big one because it changed the character of the firm and the way we'd have to operate. In 1985, I was at a conference, and in that conference, an economist spoke, and he said, looked at the audience, and the audience was made up of bankers, real estate developers, architects, engineers, a number of people. He said, if you are not global by 1990, half of you will be out of business. Now, I thought he was talking to me personally, so I took him very seriously. So I went back to Bill and Shelley. I said, you know, we really have to think about going global because the U.S. market is going to come to a halt by 1990 or before then, and we're going to pay a tough price if we're not global and not diversified. Because most of our work, as a result of 333 Wacker, was office buildings. Tall buildings for the most part. In fact, this one fun story, clients would only call us if they wanted to build a tall building. And I really got annoyed because there was a project that I knew the client. I said, hey, I'd love to do your building. He said, well, it's 3 stories. He said, well, we do 3 stories. He said, no, you only do tall buildings. He said, his name was Bill. He said, Bill, you see those first 3 floors of that building? We did those first 3 floors. So finally tried to convince me we could do corporate headquarters and other types of buildings, not just tall buildings. But the global idea was, how do we get to be global? You just don't say, I want to be global. So the first thing we did was say, well, London. I always wanted to work in London. And of course, the language was a little easier for us if we came here. And it turned out that I'd heard that Goldman Sachs was going to do a corporate headquarters in London. And it turned out that I knew the head of real estate, which was a good break. And I called him, and he was a good friend, and I said, we'd love to do the building here. I said, we have a great firm. You know, I gave him a whole sales pitch. And of course, he could have said, listen, Gene, you've never worked in London. It's very tough to get approval in this city. We really want to get this building done. So thank you, but we'll probably use a UK firm. But somehow he chose us. And we got to do, on Fleet Street, the Goldman Sachs headquarters back in the late 80s. And actually got greater buildable area than the previous architects, so we did quite well. That building, and we'll go through that soon, led to our success. But here's a building. We're moving a little. We've gotten a little better dressed since the early shot on July 4th, and a little more confident, and actually doing some interesting buildings. That was one of my favorite. Unfortunately, we never got this built, but it was fun designing it. And we weren't alone. We had a great team of people, including, in this case, Bill Louie, who's now a partner, Paul Katz, who's partner and president, Lloyd Siegel, partner. These were all young guys, been with us for many years, and have grown to be successful. Jamie Von Klemper are now a partner. So this whole group, they stayed with us for years. We had very low turnover. And this is the Goldman Sachs headquarters then on Fleet Street that we did. It's a very difficult context, as you know, very historic buildings. In fact, this had to be maintained. And the main entrance for Goldman Sachs actually is through here into a courtyard, and then the building sits back there, about 500,000 square feet. Goldman has expanded since then, and we're actually studying a whole development in this area for them. The oldest bar was back in here. I remember having beer there while we were working on this project. But at the same time that we got Goldman Sachs, we won a competition in Germany, in Frankfurt, against Kleihuss and other German architects who are very good, for the DG Bank headquarters, of which this is, and one that was very sensitive in dealing with its context. The building was in 3 parts, each one dealing with different scale of buildings, and then this being the tallest. The great canopy here actually looks out to the old city of Frankfurt and the Main River, which bends at that point. But it's been a very successful building. It has residential as well, which many buildings in Europe do, about 20% of the area becoming residential. And a main atrium here, which had retail restaurants serving the community. And the building is on the skyline still today, very impressive, although they're much taller buildings. But the building does relate very well to its context. And you see, one of the great things about working in towers in places like Germany are the floor sizes are quite small, because everybody has to have access to light and air. So the floor space are very narrow, anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 square feet, where in the US you get 30,000, 40,000 square foot floors, and the buildings are much bulkier. So here you're able to get a very narrow and very elegant shape with this great canopy, almost picking up the church steeple concept here. Okay. Then we say, well, it's time also to look at Asia. Now, this is the amazing start. Now, most of our starting projects were fairly reasonable in size. So we were working for a company called Taisei, very large engineering, architectural firm and development company in Chicago, but they're Tokyo-based. And they liked working with us, so they said, well, why don't you come to Tokyo? We're going to enter a competition, and hopefully you'll be able to work with us on it. We never entered the competition, even though we designed it, but they recommended us for a project in Nagoya, Japan. This building is 5 million square feet. That's our first building in Asia. Not a bad start in Nagoya, which is the home of Toyota, but this building serves the Shinkansen, or the bullet trains, to connect Tokyo with Osaka. And they run every 10 minutes, and they're always on time. So while building this, it's very important that the plan for the closing of tracks be considered very carefully so that the bullet trains could still run through and stop here. This building contains major office building of well over 1 million square feet, an 800-room hotel. The Sky Street is quite impressive, place that connects office, hotel, and all the retail. And these are shuttle elevators that take you from the train station up into the Sky Street. And this explains it fairly carefully, the whole base of retail. In places in Asia, retail of 17, 15, 10 floors is not unusual. In the US and the UK, 2, 3 floors is probably more common. Hotel office, and you can see the elevators as they rise up and down on the lower in the podium. The Sky Street is really quite impressive. One, people come up just to enjoy the view, and here that connects the restaurants and the hotel office, and it's always quite active. And this temple was rebuilt in the late, 1959, but originally completed in 1612, was burned, it had a fire, and they had to rebuild it. Change of scale between the two time frames. But, so this is obviously the tallest building in Nagoya. Nagoya, unfortunately, was totally bombed in World War II, and the only building left was the station. And when we were asked to do this, we had to take the station down and then rebuild this building. So, okay. Other buildings we were starting to do in the States, moving around, was important ones for our career was the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas, which we did in '92. And something rather interesting about this building, we did this building in a record time frame and saved about $25 million for the federal government. And I was on the stage with the head of the what was his name? Greenspan. And Greenspan, he doesn't have much of a sense of humor because I said that we had just saved the federal government $25 million with the completion of this building, and I was sure they were going to give it back in tax breaks. Looking at Greenspan, and he totally ignored me, never smiled. But anyhow, this building is quite interesting because it's not open to the public other than to buy treasury bonds in the lobby. This is all major vaults that are below grade and above grade where they store all the money, stocks, bonds, et cetera, and gold. And for the courtyard, we thought we'd do the money sign, the US dollar, from above. But a very successful building. One of the most exciting for us was winning a competition for the World Bank headquarters in Washington, D.C. We competed originally with, I think, 20 or 30 firms, narrowed down to 9, narrowed to 3, and we were fortunate to win. And the reason we won, I think, were really twofold. One, most of the entries were in classical architecture, because in D.C., Washington, D.C., that tends to be the way most buildings go. But because this was an international bank, and a lot of third world country members, they didn't want anything classical, but more modern and obviously international style. Two, there were 2 existing buildings, one by Bunshaft back here, and another by Vincent Kling, that we were able to save. And in building the new construction here, we were able, through our structural system and mechanical, to get in 130 feet, 13 floors, and provide ceiling heights of 8'8", which is pretty amazing with a raised floor. And the reason we were doing that, we did post-tension construction slab, and all of the air and light and power all done vertically. Every 5-foot module, you can tap in for air, tap in for water and for electric. So that we won the competition, and this building looks like this then. It's 4 buildings wrapped around it, what was an open courtyard which is being closed. These were the existing buildings saved, and this is the new, and you can see these cores are very long linear cores with all of those utilities I mentioned in this area that are allowed us to have the higher ceiling heights with 13 floors. The central atrium is quite amazing. It's 150 feet cubed, and when you're in this space, you feel good even by yourself. But when they have great parties or great gatherings, it's equally exciting. And people enjoy it for lunch or just sitting in this space. And it brings, what it really has done is that it's 170 nations make up the bank. And this is where they meet, they have interaction, and develop friendships with the other bankers. So it works extremely well. We do a lot of corporate headquarters. This beside IBM, which I didn't show, that Brett mentioned, Vignettes and USA Today's headquarters in Virginia, McLean, Virginia, is 2 separate companies, although one owns the other. And the buildings are designed so where the circulation of these buildings is to the inside, so you'll see each other as you circulate. All of the common spaces are here, cafeteria, meeting rooms, newsrooms, et cetera, for both companies. So we get a lot of interaction and exchange of ideas. And the roof surfaces are also planted so that they're used actually for meetings and for social events. So I'm very green as it looks out over the countryside. And then the main stair leading up to the newsroom is also a work of art, sculpture, and it really is the feature of the lobby. Okay, now, so global so far, we've only shown you London and a bit of some expansion in the US. But the real big global place is taking place in China. We are in, I don't know, 34 countries we work, 35, but China has been, without question, the most unbelievable market in the world. It changed the entire way we have to operate. We now have a major office in Shanghai, but this was our first project, so let me first explain that, called Plaza 66. Major retail, all the top brands, and 2 major office buildings that are fully leased primarily to American companies. This was our first project in China and became very famous, and as a result, led us to be selected for many projects over time. We're now in 16 cities in China. We have probably over 130 million square feet of buildings built, which is pretty amazing. So this was the first tower we did in Shanghai, in Plaza 66, with a great light source up here at the very top. And that's one of those interesting tops that cap this building. The retail is very successful, as you see, within a 5-story retail base, always full of action and highly decorated for various seasons. Okay, that project and this project coming up led to the biggest project we've done, but let me start with this. This project is Roppongi Hills, and you can see Mount Fuji back here, by the way, clear day. This is probably the sumo wrestler of all buildings. This building has 60,000 square foot floor plates. That is big. It's over 1.5 acres of land, and it's 60 stories high. At the very top is a great museum with fabulous views, as well as retail and other things at the base. There's also a school up here, a club. As part of the overall master plan, there's a TV station by Maki, there's housing, and then we did this hotel you'll see in a minute, and movie theaters, all part of this. Mr. Mari, who is the client, is one of the most visionary clients I've ever seen. This man never talks about budget, never talks about profit loss. What he talks about is what he's going to contribute to the city of Tokyo or any city he works in. He's most concerned about the quality of the environment that you build and the quality of the place you create and what he can do to help cities like Tokyo, his hometown, become even better. These are the kind of clients you really want because they really care about what they're building. And if you've been to Japan, I'm sure a number of you are from, the quality of construction is second to none. I always joke, but I'm serious, that Japanese contractors make bad architects look good, good architects look great, and great architects like God. And it's true. If you do a good building, it's going to look better than ever. And I always say that to achieve a great work of architecture, truly is the hardest thing you can do. I don't know of anything that's more complex, and I'm going to explain that in a second. But this is an example of really phenomenal building. There's that whole museum, art center, observation gallery, et cetera, and then the lower retail here. This building is a city within a city. And major tenants like Goldman Sachs are the tenants of the office building. But people love living here and enjoying this place, which attracted 42 million visitors last year. Now, if you put that in perspective, Las Vegas attracted 38 million. And they don't have a casino here. This is strictly some retail and theaters, et cetera, and the museum. And lovely, the retail has restaurants extending out of the hotel in over the shopping. So the whole experience is quite exciting. They even have this great central place that's used not only for Tai Chi, but for theater, for interesting discussions, for even demonstrations. So it's a great public space. And the hotel is truly a terrific experience. It's a Park Hyatt, which has some of the best beautiful rooms and public facilities of any hotel ever. Okay, getting back to my talk about what's important about creating great buildings. Just, can you imagine, I'm sure many of you will face this soon, all the forces that you're going to come across and face when you try to do a piece of architecture. Imagine a block of clay, absolutely smooth, okay? Square. And then start to think about the forces that are going to start to shape it. First is your client. Clients have attitudes, ideas, needs, program. That's got to affect it, right? Second is going to be the city officials, the zoning, the city's view corridors here in London, historic buildings that one needs to respect. They start to punch that clay a bit, and shave it because you got to have this view and you got to reduce this height. Tough. And English heritage can be very difficult in trying to get, and cave used to be, but they all make it difficult to get the buildings approved. Now add to that the other issues. You've got hundreds to thousands of people who actually work on these buildings. Not only the team of the architects and the engineers, all who contribute and restrict or limit or add. Then you have the contractors. And now if the contractor is very, very good, as in Japan, you're probably going to get a terrific product. But if they're not, we have some in the US who love to cut everything short, make more money, save money, and change the details, or try to, substitute the material by being delayed, and then you need it and it's too late to get what you want. All of a sudden, some of those great details and materials you pick, they have to change. So now this clay is getting further reduced. Then all of a sudden, you have a terrible economic period. And my clients, oh, I can't afford to build this building. So I've got to start to reduce the cost. I've got to cut pieces out, area out, materials. All of a sudden, this great vision and dream you've had is now being squashed and changed and fixed. And you're losing control because all these outside forces are starting to dictate what this building is going to be. So I promise you, when you do something that turns out absolutely beautiful, and the details are what you want, and the materials and the spaces, you have accomplished something that's very difficult to do. But you didn't do it alone. You did it as part of a team. And what has made our firm successful is that we are a team. And we have many great teams and many great partners. I think we're up to 18 partners now, all very talented. Mustafa, who's a graduate here, one of those partners who, we all work together. And every player on that team, no matter what he or she is doing, is important to the success of the project. And in our firm, the best idea wins. So if you have a better idea than I do, that's the idea we're going to go with, and you get the credit. It's not about how good I can be. You know, I have a thing with celebrities. While I admire many of them, the press makes it seem as if a celebrity does everything. You forget the 100 people behind them or the 1,600 people behind them. So that the celebrities can't do it all, but they always take credit. I mean, I won't go into who does what, but I can bet you that a number of the best known architects don't even see half the drawings, half the projects that get built, because they can't. You can't have 16 offices and 1,600 people and be involved in every project. It's not possible. So if you have good people and a good team and you give the credit, then your firm is producing the kind of buildings and work you want. And that's been important to me and important to my partners, and it remains that way now. For example, this building in Merrill Lynch, Japan, is one of the most beautiful, I think, detailed And from a plan, it works magnificently for Merrill Lynch. Offset core, major spans of 55 feet for trading. The building has its retail, has a school here, connects to subway and retail below, and all this is Merrill Lynch's office. But the detailing of this building has been executed magnificently by the Japanese contractors, and various glass textures and detail that work with dealing with sun issues, environmental issues in a very effective way. Okay, I just thought you'd see something kind of interesting. One of the things that amazed me about China has been the speed with which China has changed. This is 1990. That's only 20 years ago, right? That's Pudong. This is Shanghai. I'm sorry, go back. I gave away the secret. Bless you. This is Puxi, the main part of Shanghai, and this is Pudong. I was there in 1988, and so it was even less here than that. And here it is 20 years later. Pretty amazing. You know of any other place in the world where you could build that much in that time frame? All of this and all of that? And we've done about 8 of those buildings, including this one, and several others you can't see behind here. It's an amazing accomplishment. So working in China has been, in a way, one of the most exciting things, because one, we're making major impact in this country, but two, we see our buildings built within 3 or 4 years of just conceiving them. You know, in England, you can wait 10, 12, 15 years before you finally see the results. In the US today, too, you can wait 10 years. But in this place, when they say they're going to build, they build it. And usually they build it well, and you have your building and your vision in a fairly short time. It's pretty exciting. So as architects, we really love working here because we're getting some great projects. The one that's probably got the most notoriety and most fame at the moment for us has been the Shanghai World Financial Center. And I like to describe this building because in a way that it represents sculpture, in a way, it represents function, it represents budget, it represents its place in the city, all very, very well, and it represents structure and the wind forces equally well. So this building is tapering and changing floor sizes, which you'll see here. No 2 floors are the same, and the lower floors work very well for American companies. They're over 30 to over 35,000 square feet. As the building rises, the floors get smaller, and European companies where you need access to daylight, et cetera, are housed in the smaller floors. And then the hotel needs even smaller floor plate, and that's at the very top. So the function works quite well. Structurally, too, this thing is much more stable. You know, you try to push me this way, it's very hard. But if you push me that way, you can knock me over a little bit easier. This building, by its tapering, has great sense of structure. And by the, there it is rising to the top as it tapers. But I'll get to this one in a minute. But at the very top, you'll see there's a great opening. At tall towers, 2/3 of the wind force hit the top 1/3 of the tower. So if you really want to solve your structural problem, you've got to deal with the wind up here. And as you see back there, there's a great opening of 50 meters high, which lets the wind through, but it also becomes the identity of the building and the skyline. So it serves 2 purposes. At the very top is this walkway. Now this is glass, 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 glass. So if you're afraid of heights, this is not the easiest place to step out into. And I watch people get off the elevator, which rises 1,600 feet in 60 seconds. Japanese elevator, one boom. You come out on this and people start to step and they realize they're seeing through it to the space below. And so all of a sudden they pause. So it's not for the faint-hearted, it's not the place you want to come. But you will see the most unbelievable view of Shanghai from this space. Now, the building contains, at the very top, a great hotel with restaurants, bars, unbelievable swimming pool. It's raised, so as you swim, you can look over and see down over the city of Shanghai. And as sunset hits, you can see this building stretches 1,612 feet, and that's the observation deck. And that's the great opening that is both a symbol on the skyline, but also relieves the wind as it hits this tower. So, Shanghai day and night. Now, just 4 meters shorter in Kowloon is a building called ICC, which is one of our most exciting as well. This is a office, Ritz Hotel, which is even higher in some respects than the hotel you just saw, which was the Park Hyatt in Shanghai. This sits over a rail which connects Kowloon to Hong Kong Island and to the airport. And it is a unique building among this field of residential buildings and against the hillside back here. The strength of this building, as you'll see in a moment, and the way it picks up the light day or night is pretty amazing. What it's made up of is retail and access to the transportation, the train here, office space, and then the Ritz Hotel. What's interesting is this building was built and operated and occupied in phases. Very unusual. Morgan Stanley was the tenant here, and they moved in while the building was being built above them. So what do you think we had to do to make that work? We had to seal this whole building off, air conditioning, structurally, et cetera, while we were building that. And then Credit Suisse moved here while we built this space, which was for Deutsche Bank, and then eventually the hotel. So the owner was receiving income while building the tower. Now that's good, but the risks are high. I would probably have not recommended doing it, but they wanted to do it because the risk of beams going through ceilings and causing some damage, et cetera, is a problem. But it also delayed construction by about a year. Nevertheless, they thought it was a very good way to go, and they've succeeded. The skin is rather interesting. It's like a shingle, and it overlaps, does two things for you. It does create great interest, but it roughens the surface. So as the air moves across that, it's slowed and doesn't have the same impact down on the street that if the tower was a flush skin. But it also is like a dragon, and this is a dragon's tail that leads all the way down to the subway and to the retail and the train system. So you come out of the tower, down to the retail, and eventually into the train system. And the developer had Caesar Pelli do this one. We did that. So these are goalposts across. So the entrance to the harbor is now marked by two giant towers. This is slightly taller. Okay. Other projects we're doing as part of this global work is working in the Mideast. And the AIA headquarters is still considered one of the most beautiful buildings in Abu Dhabi on the coast, and one we're very, very proud of. It's for their investment company. And then, jumping back and forth here, the airport should have come next, but it'll come in a minute. Heron Tower here in London is being completed for Gerald Ronson, and this is one that we've done. It's going to be a very excellent building, and this beautiful cross bracing with stainless steel covering. The structure makes for a very rich exterior in contrast to the masonry here. And underway now is the Pinnacle, which will be the tallest building in London. It's quite sculptural, as one can see, next to Norman Foster's Gherkin. These make up, as you see in here, this also has a shingled skin. A little more complex due to the geometry of the building, but a very rich surface, also roughened by that shingle kind of effect. And there you see it on the skyline, and it was approved as part of a tent-like shape. So from tent zoning, this became the pinnacle or the key point on the skyline. But at the same time as that we were working on diversified locations, one of the things we decided we really had to pursue other types of buildings. You know, just doing office buildings, it's fun, exciting at times, but your team gets a little bored with the same kind of building program. The shapes become more important than almost the program. And obviously working in different countries is fascinating. But we felt that it was important to do university work, educational work, hospitals, airports, et cetera. So we began to look at other opportunities. In New York, our first big chance came to do a university building called Baruch College. Now, in New Yorkers, you don't have a lot of space to spread out. This campus is in this building and one other. And it's 4 different schools tacked in here, plus below ground, there, so that's Bill's original sketch, but below ground are all the sports facilities, basketball, swimming, and so forth, as well as theaters. And then there are several university or college departments tied vertically through this building with escalators and elevators. And then each one of the schools has its own bit of atrium, which means where people can gather. But the key was we wanted that south light to come through the whole building, and you'll see that it does. So some of the shots of that school, this is a 800,000 square feet of space in one roof, under one roof for the students. And you can see the kind of light and space that's been created for the students. And then that's the main entrance, and you can, actually from here you can see through the building to the skylight and the light, the sun above. You know, creating spaces in school that aren't just classroom, but spaces, the lounges, I noticed one where you have your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and drinks and parties, I guess. But this happens to be at the University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School. I show it because this space has done wonders for the school. It's not only where professors and students meet, but students are undergrad and grad at Wharton. But the Wharton School, because it's the business school and because all the rich kids somehow come out of the business school, rather, was never looked upon by the rest of the university as equal. This space has brought so many students from the other schools here that they just love, now Wharton's become very popular because they just love coming here. They can get food, drink, and talk, and it's become the center for a good bit of the university. Brett mentioned the Rothmere School here at American Institute, Rothmere American Institute. We did at Oxford many years ago, basically a library, where visiting professors, even Bill Clinton came and taught here one summer after his presidency. There are classrooms and you break out space on this beautiful lawn, and the main library space is here. And you can see that in these drawings. This building, by the way, is cooled at night. It's concrete, all concrete structures, cooled at night. So during the day, it helps to radiate coolness. We have no air conditioning in the building. We just bring in the air low and circulate through the building across the structure, which has been cooled, as I said, at night. And it works quite well. I was there in July, hot day outside, and the building was cool and pleasant. Okay. We've just finished in New York, in Michigan, University of Michigan in the U.S., the Ross Business School, which the developer donated $110 million. You don't have that in England as much, but in the U.S., many schools are supported by donation of private individuals. So one of their graduates gave the money to build this school, and it's a business school that's very modern, but yet relates to the use of brick and terracotta and glass to many of the other buildings on the campus. But this is the space that really is key. This, again, is the most popular space on the University of Michigan's campus, and it's where students can eat, meet, work, and their classrooms surround the space. So it's a very active place for meeting people. Okay, just some other projects really quickly. This factory in Japan called Inks was a major award winner, a very simple building, but it's where robots are developed for various industries. And it's fascinating. Hospital work, the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, all of this is new construction around an existing building that looked like it was really, this is for really sick children. Most of these children do not recover but are treated here. This whole new building has been built around it and changed its character. Because we could not replace the exterior wall behind this glass, because we'd have to remove the wall, these children can't be moved out of their rooms. We built an atrium and then created this new surface, which you see there, here. So the rooms were here, and that wall we couldn't take down, and we built this whole new wall outside to create a great space for them. And most of his great accomplishment, the Abu Dhabi Airport, which is soon to start construction. I think it's a fantastically beautiful place. It's going to be one of the great airports in the world and one of the great places to go. Even if you just fly through here to see the airport, it's going to be quite an experience to do that. And it's really a great place. We're very proud of this, and hopefully it starts construction this year. Hotels in China, some interesting ones that we've been doing with these screen-like effects on the wall. I'm going to move a little quicker. We've also done a new city in Korea called Sangdo City, and it's 150 million square feet, built on 1,500 acres that does this. And it's already well under construction. These are real buildings, these aren't models. Some of the housing, which is quite wonderful. A lot of Korean housing were just a series of similar slabs, and the only way you could tell the difference was the number. Through this variety of towers and low-rise and mid-rise, we're able to create a much more rich texture for housing in gardens, including even canal housing, which sold very well. By the way, these buildings, this whole unit sold out in one day, 2,500 units, and there were 60 buyers for every apartment. So a pretty popular place. New convention center, which we've done, as well as the Central Park, which is being built as part of this experience. So, and some new towers that are a little underway, a little more sculptural than the other work, but these are office buildings and are underway now. Also for Latte, a super tower. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this will be the tallest tower in Korea. For Latte is a candy company and so forth that wants to really have a piece of candy on the skyline. Sweet building. Bad joke, but back to London, 2 Kingdom Street, we've just finished recently, and with a great atrium, which the offices are around, and then the quality of that office space and its exterior wall, which is quite handsome. Finally, I wanted to show you this building, which is Unilever's headquarters here in the city. This original this facade was part of a building done in 1930 by opposite the Blackfriars Bridge. And Unilever decided just a few years ago to stay here instead of moving. And when they did, they decided, John Bushell of our office designed this. He redesigned the entire floor, making this far wider than the original plan, creating a bridge that had the elevators at this point, and a series of what we call flying carpets here, with a great atrium running through the building. So let me just show you, this is the traditional entrance that they weren't even using. Now we use it. You come in that entrance and you hit this space. Now let me tell you, you come through a traditional classical wall, beautifully done in masonry, and you come into a space that just absolutely blows your mind. It is so exciting and cheerful and daylight and transparent, both vertically and horizontally. You see across people working in their spaces in a very effective way, with great views of the city line. This wall was solid in the original building, a few punched windows. Took it down and made it all glass, and look what you see. Pretty amazing, right? Conference rooms. So this company, Unilever, has changed the way it works. It used to have all enclosed offices, narrow corridors, very dense, to one of the most cheerful and open spaces you could have. We had a great party here last night, and when the weather's good, you go up on this deck, see St. Paul's, the skyline of London. Great place. Okay. Quickly, we have firms at KPF, New York, London, Abu Dhabi, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Seoul, and we move our people around. So depending on their skills and the projects we have, they move from one office to another to work on those. There are obviously people based permanently in each place, but we do like to move people and help them both get new experiences from their location. These show, if you were to continue to put lots of little dots, the most work being done in places like China, part of the U.S., Europe, Asia, even in South America at this point. We've worked in 35 countries, and with a staff from 45 countries. That currently, although you have more diversified group than that, with I think over 60 or 70 different countries represented, but 45 is pretty good for the firm, and you can see where they actually come from and where they're working. I wouldn't try to trace this for accuracy, but it's pretty close. So. Okay. Great team here in London. Mustafa, you all know, but Jamie Van Klemper, John Bushell, Paul Katz, who's now president of the company, Brian Gerard, Nick. A lot of terrific people make up these teams. Again, I stress the team spirit of the firm, all working together. This is Sean Duffy, one of the best technical people and builders I've ever met. Bill and I teach at Harvard Business School, as I mentioned. I had Bill as my guest one day, and we were happily walking down the corridor to the classroom. We teach the cases that help you understand the impact of business on our economy, on architecture, and architecture on the economy. Okay, I thought I'd show you this. Can anybody read this chart? Anybody know what this is? Last part of our talk is really about the economy. The economy plays a big role in architecture. Most critics never talk about the buildings and when they were built, or the decisions that had to be made because of the economy. But if you weren't born then, but this was the major depression. the worst part of it being back in the early 30s, 32, 33. The red indicates all those periods of time when we've had a negative growth and a serious economy. This is the most recent, 2008-9, major crash. But you can see for the most part, since World War II, the economy has been above zero. It means the GDP has been growing. And so what I did is to trace, and I'm going to leave you this disk, so you can look at this in more detail. But when certain buildings were finished, and what period they were finished, and you can add 3, 4 years to them and you know when they started or subtract, and you can see was it in the good times or the bad times. Now, interestingly enough, the Chrysler Building, Empire State Building, and even Rock Center occurred in the very bad time. But their clients were rather bold, and they had money, and they wanted to build. Most developers would not have done that in this period of time. But buildings like Libra, Seagram's, Union Carbide, all done in relatively good times, missing, for example, Seagram's building, let's take Libra House. It was finished in 1952. It had to start somewhere about in here. So it was very bold to make this decision between these two low periods, but they finished in the best of times. What's that mean? They could rent, well, they took most of the building for themselves initially, but they could rent at high prices. So you could just look across it, but let me show you some of the buildings we're talking about. Woolworth Building was finished in 1913. That was before the Depression, so the times were good. It's a very elegant building, beautifully detailed, wonderful materials, expensive building for its time. Chrysler Building finished in 30, but remember, the crash started about 28, but this building was designed and constructed, started before then. So the bold decision was to build it. It finished at a very bad time in 1930 and remained empty for quite a while, as did the Empire State Building, which was finished in 31. There were no tenants, I think, for as much as almost 10 years in that building. And they had other nicknames for this building other than the Empire State. Rockefeller Center was started in 31, but remember, the Rockefellers decided to do this. They had the ability to do it and the money. But it was finished in 33, the very end of the Depression. So it began to benefit from the economy picking up at that point. But it was very well done because the Rockefellers cared. And great architects like Harris, Wallace, and Harrison worked on it. This architecture, this place today is as popular or more popular than it ever was over 80 years later almost. The rents are extremely high. People always stay here, never want to leave. It's just a great location. One of its features is that great skating rink, which makes it very popular winter and summer, because you have also dining in this gardens when the skating rink is not there. The Libra House finished in 52, one of the very best buildings in New York, I think, where they opened up the whole base of to the street, did not fill up the whole site with a bulky building, and created a wonderful work environment back in 52, SOM, the architect. And Mies van der Rohe Seagram's building, one of my favorites still in New York, set back from Park Avenue. And when it was the only building set back, it really worked quite effectively. You have all the buildings across on the street front, street wall, and then this sets back to this elegant building with fountains, etc. That was finished in 57. I remember going to visit in 57 and 59. I was so impressed. And Philip Johnson did the dining room in there. That's the Four Seasons room, which is great. Union Carbide, another great building finished by Skidmore in a good period, 1960. It was unique for the 60s buildings that were to follow, because this was a very handsome piece of architecture and still does exist. It's now J.P. Morgan's headquarters. But in 63, Emery Roth finished this building, which Beluski actually had started as a design for Pan Am at the end of Park Avenue, one that received a lot of criticism because it really blocked that whole avenue by its full width. And a very bold building, kind of very concrete, heavy, and bold in its design. But a lot of the buildings that started to happen in the 50s and 60s were these in New York. Inexpensive, curtain walls that seemed to just cover the whole thing, roof, sides, floors, everything. I'm just joking, but they really were very inexpensive, cheap buildings. And I call these buildings were built by statistics. The efficiency, the amount of square feet, and the cost per square foot, everything was by the numbers. And nobody really thought about architecture. I don't even think the bankers looked at what they were financing. So these were some of the worst buildings done in New York at that time, and there are a whole slew of them. just fulfill the zoning, all these wedding cake setbacks. Such a contrast to Libra House and Seagram's. But they all occurred in the 50s and 60s in a really tough time for architecture. Rock Center continued to grow, but not in the same quality back in 60 to 69. And these buildings on 6th Avenue are big slabs set back, not particularly friendly to the street. Skidmore did in 1970 this wonderful building, the John Hancock building, which was one of the first mixed-use buildings in the world. It has retail, it has offices and apartments and a great lookout tower above. Really a terrific building, one of the first to use the great cross bracing that saved a tremendous amount of money as it resisted the wind by this external bracing rather than through the core and the rest of the structure. So great building, done at a very good time as the end of the 60s. People were starting to care more about architecture. Jerry Hines, as a new developer, hired Philip Johnson, who you never would have guessed to do a spec building for a developer, but did this wonderful project called Pennzoil in 75. It's still one of the favorite buildings in Houston. City Core by Stubbins in 77. Some really good buildings happening at this period of time. Still one of the best buildings in New York. But then in the 80s, this is where I want to get, there are two periods of time when exuberance and overdone happened. In the late 80s with postmodern, people were very wealthy. Developers were competing one with the other, trying to outdo each other in building the best building. And the best building became one that had the most elaborate things happening, materials that were extremely rich, stone that was very deep in its dimensions, recesses. And Philip Johnson, probably more than any other architect, led that movement and did some very successful buildings, but not always great buildings in my opinion, but certainly ones that became very popular to the consumer and really sparked. You know, some of these things spaces up here just didn't work, but they became fascinating tops in the skyline. His most famous, at least in New York, being the Chippendale or the AT&T building with this top here. But Philip I knew quite well, and he was a great character. I'll tell you a quick story about this, and I'm running short of time, I apologize. But we were a brand new firm when this was commissioned. This was finished in 84, but it was commissioned in 76, 77. And I knew the head of AT&T, a key guy, and I said, we'd love to do your building. He said, but Gene, you're 4 people here, new firm, how can you do that? He said, but I tell you what, call Philip Johnson, because we think we're going to give it to him. And tell Philip we'd like you to work with him. And, he's in his 70s, he might die, and you guys will be around to pick up the building. I couldn't tell Philip that was the reason. He's going to die, so we need to be there. So I called Phil. I never met Philip. I met him years ago when I was a student, but I called him. I said, he answered the phone, and I introduced myself. And now, how do you tell Philip Johnson that that you've been the firm that he should work with to do this building? So I did. I just was very. I said, yes. I go stand. I met the president, and he thinks it might be a good idea that we work. He said, Gene, I don't know you. Thank you. You're rather aggressive. He said, but we have 2 other architects we're working with. I don't think we need a 4th. So thank you very much. He started to tell people about my call, how aggressive that was. So we became friends after that. But he did the building. We had nothing to do with it. So it's still a very fascinating building. Sony now occupies it. SOM did this one. As the period started to end, toward the end of that, what you have to look at is toward the end of any period where there's been a lot of money spent to build, let's call them icons, you're just before the crash. I predicted the last crash because I predicted this one too. Anytime things get so expensive, buildings get so outlandish, that the developers just pouring money, we're obviously going to end the good times. And it does work. So this was just before the bad times in the early 90s, in the late 80s. But in good periods, like now, and up until now, buildings like the Hearst that Foster did, I personally have never been as excited about the combination of this base with this tower. I thought Norman could have done a much simpler building, but this does read well on the skyline, and it's very popular in New York, and there's a wonderful entry to it. Or this one by Piano, which is a very handsome building for the New York Times. Only one comment or criticism here. These screens are obviously for screening the sun, but they happen to be on all 4 sides. So you say, well, if it's right for the south, can it be right for the north, east, and the west? Obviously not. So you're spending a lot of money that really, and energy for something that only works in one face. But beautiful building nevertheless. And then Frank Gehry, you know you're getting near the end of the good times. This was designed before it was finished in 2010. But you know, you're obviously taking what is a very normal, simple apartment building in New York and creating something that's far more interesting but costly, and you know you're getting near the end. This was designed in 2006 and finished by then. Okay, last point I want to make. So with the economy, when the economy gets very good, people spend more money. And when they get toward the end of the period, they spend too much, and you know you're getting to the end. And then it reverts back. Buildings done just after the recessions are the simplest boxes, because all the developers have been burned. And the last thing, and they can't get financing. So we're going to do very simple, inexpensive buildings. And you watch the buildings coming out of this recession, they're going to be a lot simpler than the ones that's just finished in 2007, 8, and 9. Now let's talk about tall buildings. A point I'm going to make here. Most tall buildings all through history, whether the Empire State, the Chrysler World Trade Center, as they tried to be super tall, the Willis Tower, the former Sears Tower in Chicago was the tallest, the Petronas Tower. The shape of the building may vary, but one thing you notice is they're what? All straight. They all reach up to the sky. They're trying to be tall. It's like a human being who's tall, a basketball player. They stand tall. They don't hunch over, twist. So these buildings, even though they're sculptural in their form, are still standing vertically. Our building in Shanghai, one of the tallest in the world. Or the Burj Dubai, or now the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, a super tall building at 2684, still is straight. Shapes are varying at each cross section, but it's a straight tower. Sculptural buildings have come along now to challenge some of my statements about being vertical. So real quick, a rather elegant Swiss headquartered by Foster, a unique shape, and became well known worldwide because of that shape and as the Gherkin Tower. We believe the Pinnacle will do the same, and being a very important building on the skyline, certainly sculptural. And then Cool House's CCTV. I happened to see this when it was being built, and the structure behind here is so dense that it's hard to imagine that anybody sees out of the building, because that cantilever is enormous. And remember, to get out of the building, you have to go back to fire stairs all the way back here. So this cantilever is quite amazing. So while it's a great shape on the skyline, the cost of this is staggering, and you don't really see out of the building too well. But nevertheless, very fascinating building. In MGM in New York, between Leapskin's retail and Helmut Jans did these two towers to relate to Leapskin. They're tilting away from each other to provide views. We did the Mandarin, but that happens to be straight. So. But you know, right after the World Trade Center towers came down, there was a competition to do to win the replacement. Right? And some of the entries like this one really bothered me, because just think about it psychologically. Two enormous towers came crashing down, and I was there that day, came crashing to the ground, killing almost 3,000 people. True disaster. Take what happens. Would you propose then to replace those two towers, buildings that look like they're about to fall down? I mean, just think about it. Who would go in that building? I can tell you very few. So form by itself begins to make no sense, because these buildings are looking like they're definitely all going to fall down at some point. And the mood of the people in New York after that calamity was one that would never have tolerated this. So why propose it? It makes no sense. Or buildings like the Dancing Towers through Dubai. I asked the designer, I won't mention his name, I said, well, how does the core work? He said, well, we really didn't take it into consideration, but just think about how you support that, get the elevators, utilities through there. Anything's possible, I guess, or this one that is sweeping. Why would you do that to a tall building? I mean, it's like a curtain you're pushing. Or this one, really. It looks like great snakes or worms that are coming up, and I would be scared by this one. And they're a good firm. I mean, I hate to pick on these firms, but really, these things architecture becomes silly. This isn't about architecture. That's just like iconic forms, right? Now, there's some good architects working here, so I won't be critical of the architects, but I have trouble with buildings that do that. I mean, just about if you walked around all day like this, I mean, that's what that's doing. And you wonder whether the floor is flat or tilted. You know, does the floor tilt like that? Or, I mean, how does that work? How do you actually have the floor working here, you know? And why? It's just because it's form and it's composition. Or Libeskind has done this in Singapore. And these are built now. But every one of these is just tilting. I mean, you know, you wonder what influenced that. And does that make it better because they're all tilting and bending? And I don't know. It's, for me, I have trouble with that because I can't understand. It doesn't make it a better building, in my opinion. It's an architecture, it's a composition of forms. And I love to paint, and so I might do a painting like that, but I don't know about building. So let's just do this. I think maybe the Leaning Tower of Pisa is the real reason people do it. They say, well, my God, that's exciting, you know, leans. Except the Tower of Pisa was supposed to do that. But instead, unfortunately, it's done that. And people have been trying to straighten it out ever since. Okay. So finally, last few seconds, I took the cityscape of New York, and I said, we're going to add buildings, Mies van der Rohe, this is the Hancock building, obviously, or the Sears building in Chicago. But these are all super tall, all straight. Remember what I'm trying to do now. Pei's building at the Bank of, in Hong Kong. Petronas, Foster's building, a nice piece of sculpture, but straight. But now compare it to what we're doing here. These buildings are starting to slope, right? Sculptural. Tell me what you started thinking about this cityscape now. Okay. Mies building looks pretty good in that group, doesn't it? But you know, you could end up with a city looking like this, and so you say to yourself, which would you rather have? And I kind of vote for the right, but I'm not sure how you all think. But unfortunately, these forms start to dictate architecture. And to my mind, they just ignore function, ignore budget, and some other good manners. So anyway, I end on that, and I can take a few questions. And thank you for your being very patient. I'll take
Can we do some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. See if we've got a microphone.
Yeah, this one. Hang on, I'll get it.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm wondering if you might, just as he's getting the equipment turned on, say something, Gene, about the experience you've had in terms of the clients you've worked with. Obviously an amazing group of clients over the years. And I'm wondering if there's anything you've observed about how clients might have changed in their form over the years that you've been working, and whether there are distinctions or patterns you've noticed in terms of the kind of clients you've worked with in different parts of the world.
Good, no, it's good. Good question. First, the U.S., two groups, corporate and developer. Corporate leaders have generally been good consistently. IBM's presidents or CEO of any of these corporations tends to want to build a home for their company that they're proud of, but also achieves a kind of culture. We did at IBM's headquarters recently in Armonk, New York, and Lou Gerstner said that he wanted to change the culture of IBM through this building. So using architecture to change culture is quite a dramatic effort or task for the building. But we did. We created a building that created, instead of lots of private offices and nobody talking to each other, a company where people gathered, talked, communicated, and improved the product as a result. So corporate leaders are usually fun to work with because they have a philosophy about their company. It's like doing somebody's home. Developers, on the end, remember, in most cases, are building on what we call spec. They're going to do a building and hope they get a tenant to fill it and make it financially successful. So they're going to be a little tougher about budgets because they can't afford to build something that no one's going to fund and no one's going to be able to pay the rent for. The big change in the States when we started is that a lot of the developers were families that were in the candy business or the clothing business and got into real estate. And their knowledge of building was slim, and their goals for their buildings was just the bottom line. And I showed you some of those earlier. The developers have become more professional. For example, I teach at Harvard Business School, as I mentioned to you, and there the people coming out of that school with graduate degrees have studied to be developers or real estate investors, care about, through my course hopefully, care about what they build, But they are obviously interested in making a profit, but they're very smart and they want a good product and also be profitable. I've always enjoyed the UK developers. I don't know whether it's because the UK approval system is so tough that they can't get a building approved unless they do a good one. I think that plays part of the role. But they tend to have cared about the quality, at least the ones we've worked in, about what they're building. And there have been some bad buildings done in the UK, obviously, but a lot of good ones now, I think, are happening because the clients have become more educated and care. Overseas has been really interesting, particularly in Asia. The Chinese, Japanese have been, and Koreans, in terms of quality, have all cared about the architecture. We get hired because they want to do a great building, and they hire people like Foster, Rogers, others for the same reasons, so they do care. Some are more open with their pocketbooks than others, but they do care, and they're easier to work with in some respects because they want this building to be special. And they hire you from the States or from England or Germany because they want something special. And the local although Japan has excellent local firms, and China eventually will, the local firms haven't had the experience of doing these super tall buildings, so we have an opportunity to do that in those countries. I find them very, very good clients, and easy to work with. Language sometimes is a problem, but usually they speak English. And they've been fair about payment, and we do get paid. There's some other parts of the world I won't go into. Getting paid is a little more difficult. And that's part of being successful. You have to be paid for your work, by the way. You want to be good, but you want to be paid, because you do have to eat and sleep, have a place to sleep, you know. So for me, Asia's been terrific. The UK has been very good. We've enjoyed many of our European clients. So I think in the whole, the clients have gotten better over the years from when we started to now. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm from Singapore, and
Yes.
our new financial district has 13 skyscrapers built within the last 6 years, 7 of which were built by KPF.
Right.
Do you think it's a
Do you think it's a good idea that we only did 7?
Do you think it's a responsibility on? Do you think KPF has any form of design responsibility in this aspect because they sculpt our skyline?
Because we sculpt?
The skyline.
Yeah, no, I said architects have, KPF as well, have responsibility to the place they work. Yeah, we have done a lot. Actually, we've done about 10 or 12 buildings in Singapore. And we happen to like Singapore a lot. So, yeah, I mean, we do have a responsibility to the skyline, as do the developers who are funding the buildings and creating that. I mean, the size of those buildings is not our doing. They tend to be the developer's goal, or the city. You know, the URA is a very excellent group of people who monitor the design and the approval. So they have responsibility too. So it's a joint one. But yeah, I mean, you may not like what we've done, so I'm not sure what the point is, but we do have a responsibility. We think we've contributed to Singapore, but maybe not. So but we've done the whole financial center across the marina, which is quite nice. Yeah. Anyways, thank you. Anybody else?
Questions?
My question is regarding the intellectual property infringement in architecture. In fact, Kohn Pedersen Fox company as a global architectural company is exposed to the successful design of your buildings is exposed to some projects are stealing elements of your designs, and for example, legally there cannot be any successful measure to stop such a thing. And I know, in fact, in Dubai there are some buildings already built copying your designs. Mm-hmm. So my question is exactly what's your opinion on all this?
Well, if they, I guess somewhat it's flattering that they want to copy it, but it's not just in Dubai. I must say in Japan, other places of the world, there are buildings that either are copied or been influenced by ours. You know, that we can't stop. And legally, you can only, if they took the exact drawings and built that would be, but you know, you make a few changes, you can get away with it. I guess we should be flattered that people think it's that good that they want to do one like it. So but there's little we can do. I mean, other than if it's done badly, we're very upset. If they would do a good job and it looks like one of ours, we are happy. But if they take credit with our name, that's not a good thing. So, yeah. But you can't stop it. I mean, I think a lot of architects have their work copied. And look, we influence each other. We're influenced by other architects and vice versa. So in a way, once it gets out in the world, it's information available to everyone. And the art, I mean, artists do this. You build off each other. So, but most of all, we build off the talent within the firm, which is really good. And as I say, works as a team. Very successful.
Your building in Shanghai were shortlisted in an architectural award in the German Architectural Museum. What do you think about awards like this and its function in a kind of competition, or is it like a competition, like artistical competition?
Are you referring to how do we think about receiving awards? I think all architects are delighted that somebody thinks enough of the building to give it an award, so we're happy with that. Is that what you meant? I'm not sure I got the essence of your question, but no, we're proud if institutions or other architects groups give an award to a building. I've been on many juries giving awards to other architects, so I think it's good to recognize your professional compatriots basically through awards, and it's good. It inspires others to do good.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
I don't know to somebody else, but I always understand to myself that KPF's building is hard to define by the architectural form. It's not like easy to tell whether it's Hadid or Norman Foster or somebody else's. So, if truly in your heart, if you want people to talk about the style of KPF's building, what you think that's a style of saying KPF's building?
Well, there is. It's a good question, by the way. The similarity of our work. Let me put it this way: when we approach, let's take Richard Meyer, who's a good friend, so I can take it. When Richard Meyer does a building, it's Richard Meyer, and he kind of puts it in the site. It's his project, and it's not based on context. It's always going to be usually in contrast to the context. And it's to what he chooses to do. Norman Foster to some extent, but less so. But there are a number of architects who say, look, this is my work of art, and it goes here. Picasso on the wall, without consideration of whether you collect Picassos other than you want a Picasso on that wall. Our buildings, we try to solve the problem for the owner, which is function. We try to do it in a very beautiful way that relates to the environment that we're in. The building in Japan had a lot of what makes Japan work. It's part of the Japanese culture. So when we work in the various places, we try to accommodate. I mean, the Abu Dhabi Airport you would not do in Frankfurt. It has much more relation to Abu Dhabi than it would to New York City, for example. So for us, the building has to relate to where it is, to what the function is, what the culture of the people are. And it has to be beautifully detailed and well done. I think what's consistent about our work, you saw buildings across the globe, the quality of the detail is going to be outstanding all the time. That's a goal. And the building is going to have a relationship to its place. And yet there are similarities to the building to other KPF buildings. So, but that they don't all look alike. It's not like Mies van der Rohe, for example, who I had great respect for. You could tell a Mies building, whether it's in Chicago or the Northwest, in Germany or in Baltimore, Mies would, it's his design, and he reflects, each time he does it better, but it's basically the same building. And we don't, our buildings vary from a school, it's going to look quite different than an office building. But IIT is definitely not Mies van der Rohe, and it's a shorter version of some of his office buildings, But I like Mies. I think he's very good. So I think there are different ways you can approach architecture. We approach it more in trying to be sympathetic to the environment and the client that we work for, and pick up. So when we did IBM, we solved their cultural problem. It wasn't the same as one in Virginia for some other corporation.
It also depends on the way we operate in our design procedures, like how we should appreciate that the rising power back to the team that we can,
Right.
we can authorize the way
Yeah.
we design.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, question, I don't know what you heard, is that do we allow the various talents and teams within the firm to come forward with ideas that, and we do. So each team can begin to impact its building through its own creativity, but it's guided to be part of really a KPF vocabulary by the time it's done. But it definitely allows for young and better ideas. I mean, I started with the firm, and I'm going to end with it because I do have to unfortunately run to a dinner. The idea of team, the idea of firm, is that all of us contribute. It's not me or Bill Pedersen saying, this is it, period. We're only doing this. And not that that may be wrong, because a lot of good architects have worked that way. We felt that the way is to create a firm where the young talent can all contribute and grow and become better architects. Some will stay in the firm and become partners. Others will move on and start their own firm or work for others. That's fine. I can tell you in New York alone, most every major firm now has a key KPFer who's designing or leading the design of those firms. And we've spawned about 4 firms that are doing well on their own. And in a way, I'm proud of that, because it's the chance that we've given to people to grow and become better architects. So if you care about the profession, and you care about the cities that we work in, and we're training better architects to come out of our firm and are doing great work on their own for others, that's fine. So it's not a problem, no. So yeah, we're not Mies van der Rohe. We're not many of the architects I could name. We're not Zaha Hadid, and we don't have a style so persuasive, so identify with us that you see the building instantly. It's KPF. But if you look closely at our work across the globe, you'll begin to find a consistency to the approach and to the detail and the quality, and to solving the problem. We're very proud that when we solve the problem for the school, or for the apartment building, or the office building, we change the way we influence people to work better, to enjoy life better. As I said in the beginning, we've done a great job. And it's not just about our ego, that when we pass on to somebody, oh God, you did all those great buildings. Oh, if people come out of those buildings living a better life, enjoying their work better, doing a better work, then we're happy. So when they come out, if they get better in that children's hospital, because we create a much better environment, we've done some real good. We've helped kids. And we did a hospital in Baltimore that was so revolutionary in terms of how patients would be treated and responded and dealt with. We created a city street. So when the patients there, who many die of cancer, would feel they could go to a restaurant, on a street, shop, be part of what life's about. Great daylight, skylights, gardens, art shows. They live a different life now. And it may be short, but what they're doing, their life is better. So we did something for those people that make us proud, and that's important. On that note, thank you all for being a great audience. Good. Thanks.